I think we got our obligatory 10 minutes of chit chat. So we'll start talking about what's going on. I don't know if Justin's here yet. Sturgill Kane is here yet. Atticus is here. Andy, Hope and Flames. The two of the main actors in this past weekend's game, in which I continued with this theme of otherworldly dread in the Down Darker Trails game that I've been running. And I think as we said, and I've had this conversation with a few people, it's a very different game than if I were going to run Call of Cthulhu set in Arkham or Princeton or London in the 1920s or earlier. And of course, a very different game than now, especially because the tech level is so incredibly low. Even for the 1800s standards, except for the weapons technology, which is kind of the obvious, there's Justin. There's Sturgill Kane himself, the main victim. Of course, Atticus ended up being the main victim. That was unexpected. I didn't expect Atticus's reaction, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But it's such a different game in terms of what the expectation is on the part of the players, and to some degree on the part of the game master. Um, and the first 3 or 4 sessions, 5 sessions. I guess we're about 7 or 8 sessions in now. I ran it very much like a Western mystery, kind of paranormal, weird West. Things are happening. They're trying to figure out what's happening around the town. And there were these little threads that were out there that were indicating there was greater mythos involvement, supernatural involvement. Which, of course, the players, as players of Call of Cthulhu, know that there's going to be some involvement of the mythos. And then last game session a few weeks ago, and it looks like we're unfortunately now running on like an every few week schedule, but that's part of one, things opening back up, two, the weather getting nicer, and three, just the way things go over the winter, especially, it tends to be a little bit more. Everyone's kind of more cooped up inside. Over pandemic, of course, we were playing weekly, so there was a very different world at that point. And as you all know, my goal once I finish this semester is to start running and have higher end content pouring out more regularly as part of just because I'd like to run the game, but also part of my practice in terms of the um, the parameters of the sabbatical, to do game design, just to write game material. And it's, again, I'm still kind of amazed that I'm on sabbatical to do that, but that's okay. I'll take it. So the game shifted into the horror mode with that encounter with Benny, which I talk about in the previous video, which, by the way, is performed spectacularly on YouTube. And again, thanks for everyone for contributing to the game itself, and also for contributing to these chats, and then supporting this in other environments. So that video has been doing extremely well, and there seems to be real interest in the horror. And in fact, that's I'm in part of several Call of Cthulhu groups. That's the only like spam post that I've tried, not spam, but an advertisement post that I've tried to make recently didn't get bumped because people were really enthusiastic about it. So this will be a continuation. So the horror came in when Sturgill started seeing, or was put under the influence of some sort of supernatural affection of infliction, where his best friend and faithful mortuary assistant and ends up in one of the gunfights. Someone who basically saved his ass, Benny, who was an NPC we made up the first game session, like on the fly, and we took it from there. And Benny's been the tried and true friend, and it became apparent that to gain the power from this book, the Cultist Ghouls, that Sturgill has, that he'd have to sacrifice somebody or something. And this entity, this person, variously known as Bartholomew Lonesome, a Skinwalker, the Walking Dude, yes, PJ, is manipulating this entire situation somehow, and he was trying to manipulate Sturgill into killing Benny, as a show of of power and as a show of dedication to learning the occult arts. And this was kind of, and Sturgill, who was kind of on that border of, diving into the book and a little corrupt in some of his day-to-day practices, as most Western businessmen were. Stuff like pulling gold teeth out of corpses. I mean, the kind of stuff that just went on all the time. That was something that, the line was drawn when he started getting these hallucinations of Benny being killed. And then Benny and these hallucinations started acting strangely. And then, as I explained in the last game, the game ended several weeks ago with standing at the door after they had shot it full of holes, and something in the basement that sounds like Benny is behind the door and was in the building, and in building doing his mortuary work, we assumed. And then it was clear that something was abnormal when they got there. The dog that they kept in the house fled. There was just this sense that something was wrong. And then we heard Benny kind of shuffling around downstairs and talking in this kind of hollow voice, and again, it was that tension, and it was great role playing on Justin's part, because as a player, he already had figured out something really horrible had happened to Benny. That maybe Benny wasn't Benny. And as we said in the first part of this chat, maybe Benny never was Benny, but that's not really the case. What they found out is that, of course, that, or what he assumed as a player was that something horrible and supernatural happened, and he was correct. So they finally opened the door. Well, they blew him down the stairs, and they still hear him shuffling around down there, and he's still saying things like, "It's really cold down here, boss. It wasn't nice being shot." Like these things that are these kind of strange, creepy, um, almost automatic responses. These very kind of creepy automatic responses, and at this point the dread had already started building in anticipation. And it was interesting because it was already light out. We started playing at about 7 o'clock. This week we started playing at about 7 o'clock. It was still light out. So I couldn't do all the low light to the start of the scenario. But it still really was pretty effective in terms of having built up the tension from the previous game. So as the Marshal, who unfortunately the player playing the Marshal couldn't be there, so I took control of the Marshal, just to because he was in that scene. And so they're talking to Benny, and he finally says, "Well, Benny, we're gonna open the door. Will you come back up?" And of course, Benny says, "Yes, yeah, of course, boss." So they open the door, and they're hearing slowly something walk up the stairs, and the group is getting, of course, more and more tense because they're not sure what they're gonna see. And as I've talked about in several of these casts, that's the best part, right? The most effective portion of this entire scenario was not knowing what was down there, not knowing what had happened to Benny. It was I think scarier before showing the monster, showing, I like to say in the horror movies, before you show the rubber monster, before you show the CGI monster. But anyway, so eventually they see this silhouette kind of lumber into this vaguely human-like silhouette, it's human-like silhouette, lumber into view into the doorway, and they shine the lamp on the doorway, the lantern on the doorway, and they see standing there is one of the corpses that had apparently been worked on in the mortuary. It had already been cut open. Some of the organs had already been removed. It was dripping partially from gore, and then there was, it looked like it had started to be embalmed, because Sturgill does have an embalming setup there, one of the few in the region, and it had come up the stairs, and it was wearing Benny's face in a very Leatherface like fashion, and they couldn't see exactly what was going on. They just knew it was Benny's face on this body that had been cut open. And so, of course, more panic ensues. They shoot it again, and they seem to be doing damage to it, and they eventually do enough damage, and I forget what it was. I don't know if it was the shotgun blast or whether it was the shotgun revolver. I think Sturgill shot it with his shotgun, and Benny, the thing that was Benny, as I kept referring to it, rolls back down the stairs, and they still hear it. like slithering around down there, like it was trying to get up, like it had been, and they rolled pretty significant damage. Zombie barricade. So yeah. So in the meantime, they actually were fairly tight on this, and that they had created a zombie barricade. They had taken an old desk or an old table from the front of the parlor of the funeral parlor and put it against the door. So as it tried to come out, it was trapped. Because they kind of thought this might be, of course, a zombie or something like that. So they block it, and that was a great move too, because it didn't give it a chance to get close to them, and they shot it, and they more gunshots. So at this point, there are, and it falls back down the stairs. So at this point, there are actually have it written in there. Puts the door, puts the front. Um, so they still hear Benny talking down there too, and of course this is bothering them. Yeah, after shot, they still hear Benny talking to them after they shot it full of holes, and of course that was even more disconcerting. So, and the fact it's also talking is bothering them, because if it were just like a zombie, I think if they just saw the undead Benny, Walking Dead style lurch through the door, I think they would have shot it and that would have been it. But it was clear that it had some sort of intelligence. So, as this is going on, there are three other characters who are out about town. There's the Pinkerton, Maggie, who is Mel's character, who had just gotten done visiting the town crazy cat lady. And that's for a whole other story. That's for when I continue on with talking about this story. The crazy cat lady. And of course, anyone who's Lovecraft-verse, things are going off in their head right now. And kind of the town lunatic and outcast. And she learned quite a bit from her. And she learned things like this figure, Bartholomew Lonesome, has been around since this person was a little girl, and she's an old lady now. And he's always come out and talked to people out in the desert, and he sometimes does. And her father had a pact with him. That was part of the backstory, and did favors for him. And they learned a little bit about like what this thing's motivations are, what this being's motivations are. And so the Pinkerton hears it, so of course she starts going towards it. And also Atticus, our mountain man drifter, and Birdie, our shotgun rider, who's Diana's character, were after drinking quite heavily because they had run into the undead coyotes in the previous scenario, the previous night, or that earlier that night in the previous game session, drinking carefully after losing quite a bit of sanity, stumble out into the street from the saloon, and they hear these gunshots. Now Birdie at this point is so drunk, she critically failed her con check to, recover from alcohol, or she close to critically failed it. But in any case, they end up, so she has a shotgun, a loaded shotgun. So of course they're getting panicky about this. Atticus is drunk. I ruled he's drunk and he has a penalty, but he is still functional. He still is with his facilities. So they head up there and they get to the funeral home, and Sturgill finds them and sees them coming towards them. They make Birdie sit outside on the porch because she's so drunk. They didn't want her with her shotgun inside shooting around the funeral home among the rest of the party, among the rest of the investigators. But they get Atticus in there. And let's see. So they return to the foyer. Maggie's still coming up. She hasn't quite gotten there yet. And Sturgill goes to a stable out back, and he gets himself a pitchfork. He gets himself a pitchfork, and he gets himself a couple other farm implements that they can use hand to hand against whatever this thing now is, which was quite a smart move. Because again, if you know any of the zombie or undead lore, of course, you're much more, if you're willing to get close to them, it's much more effective to attack them with something blunt or something sharp close up than it is necessarily to try to shoot them. And in Call of Cthulhu, it works that way too. Their gunshots do very, very little to walking corpses. But they get to the top of the stairs, and I think at this point, well, Atticus run. So they get ready. Atticus just runs downstairs as Atticus does to confront them. And I don't know if he got a shot or not. I can't remember if he got a shot. I think he got a shot, but. So Atticus sees this thing with Benny's face on it as it's getting up, and it's moving as after the shot. Okay, so he shoots it. He runs downstairs, and as it's moving it's trying to get up, and I kind of portrayed it in the sort of fashion as you see in like The Ring or something like that, where this thing is moving in this completely unnatural way to right itself up after being shot full of holes, and pieces are hanging off of it from the gunshots, but it's still talking while they're trying to do this. So Atticus makes his sanity roll, and he fails his sanity roll, and he loses 5 sanity, which, as players of Call of Cthulhu know, indicates temporary insanity. Now, he also gets an idea roll, right? He gets the idea roll to see if he has some greater grasp of the situation, of the horrible grandeur and true nature of the universe. And he got a critical success. He rolls 0-1. So, yeah, temporary clarity. Yes, let me get some of these chats up. So yeah, I mean that's the whole thing. Like the great thing is about these players is even though they don't originally come from Call of Cthulhu, or even when we sat down, Fran and to a lesser degree Diana were the ones who had the real core of the mythos knowledge. Everybody's totally bought into it, which is great. So yeah, so he doesn't have temporary insanity. He has temporary clarity. Now, previous to this, he had had a conversation with the local young deacon of the town, who is quite evidently, if you talk to him outside of church, quite evidently insane, and as the players realize, is a cultist. So he's a cultist worshiping something that he calls the Shining Host. And he talks about things like being able to see the greater cosmos and the truth of the cosmos, and Jesus is one god, but he's the god of the sheep, but there are other gods out there that demand more of you, and can give you more back. Of course he doesn't say this in church to any of the townspeople, only if someone convinces him they're interested, which Atticus managed to do in a previous game session. Now, unfortunately, this is in Atticus's head while he's undergone temporary insanity. So he stumbles out into the night, and he's seeing the stars seem huge, like hanging globes. Yeah. So in the meantime, everybody lost sanity. Everybody lost sanity from this particular encounter. The only one who did not was Birdie, because Birdie was drunk on the porch, watching out, that making sure no bad guys came up on them. Meanwhile, they just stuck her out there because she was drunk with a shotgun, and they were like, she is not coming inside. So Sturgill's lose Sturgill because he's seeing his good friend, reanimated in this horrific fashion. He's now up to a 13% mythos score, which of course we all know means has far less possible permanent sanity. And Atticus, I forget what Atticus is at, but he's not too far behind. He's definitely notching it up slowly but surely. I think it was Atticus that has the 13. I don't think so though. I think it was because you started out with more. So because Sturgill started out with more because he had the book. Yeah, okay. So actually Atticus is now he's in the 20s. So they have been racking up some Cthulhu mythos and some sanity loss the past couple game sessions. And as I said, this was the turning point. The last game session was the turning point that it went from an Old West mystery, weird West, to a real horror scenario, real mythos based scenario. And also they hadn't really seen anything before. Now Atticus also has low sanity because he has a whole backstory, and I actually started him off with less sanity than what originally his character might have had according to the numbers. And so this game, the way I arranged is I had the players write up a bit of a backstory and tell me what kind of character they wanted to play, and I made the sheets. And it was purely a time saver thing. And I let them alter it. I gave them points so they could alter the points on the sheets, and then they could make adjustments as they wanted. Like if they said my character really should have science of 20% or whatever, I wasn't going to argue, right? Like, because again, in my world, those are not the important things, especially in this game. So, yeah, Atticus was already pretty frayed by the time he got here. So he's out in the night, and he's seeing the sky become this grand thing, and he's seeing all these colors, and he's seeing past stars and glimpsing nebula and all, and again, of course, he's also temporarily insane. So the reality is, did he really see all that, or was this just an influence of the insanity? If you play Call of Cthulhu, you've already got some ideas as to what to what's going on behind the scenes here. Especially if you followed the first video where I talk a little bit about the things like the fire hill and the cursed flies, which are Migo. You know, they figured out they're Migo. So there's this kind of buildup going on, and this was a very slow burn game, which I didn't actually intend. I didn't know how it was going to go, but it ends up being this very slow burn. So in the meantime, while he goes off into the night in a bit of temporary insanity, then Sturgill decides he's got to take care of this. He braves his madness and he runs downstairs and he gores. Let's see. This is good. Yeah, exactly. You're like Captain America, except worse. The star-addled man with a plan. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's a heroic character, and he's a darkly heroic character. Like again, I actually based a lot of this game. I can talk about this a little bit more. Like, a lot of this game on Hell on Wheels, the mood of Hell on Wheels, and he's kind of like the main character in Hell on Wheels, or some of the accessory characters that are already so damaged when they get there, and then of course in this world the mythos make it all worse. The occult elements make everything worse. So Sturgill runs downstairs and he uses his pitchfork, which was the right thing to do, skewers the thing that was Benny. Yeah, Hell on Wheels was amazing. It took me years to watch it. I finally watched it right before it went off air and I marathoned it. I was like, how did I never see this? And I texted Blake, who's a big Western fan. And I was like, he's like, I kept telling you about it. You kind of ignored me. I'm like, I don't know why. I never watched this. But anyway, the setting is very Hell on Wheels in feel. So it's definitely even a little different than some of the other Western settings. Runs down and he skewers the thing that was Benny and he disanimates it. He pierces it through its heart that was still beating in the open chest cavity, and he kills it. And he gets down there and he finds the ritual scene. He finds his book, The Cult of Ghouls, which he doesn't even know how it's there because it's either in his backpack or it's locked up upstairs. But of course, you know, there are supernatural agents, particularly a obviously very powerful one at play here. The book is laid out. There is this ritual scene with candles and the very traditional Necronomicon symbols painted around the floor of one of the mortuary tables, and Benny's body is there. Benny's naked body is there, and his face has been removed, and the other corpse is there with Benny's face on it, the one that was on the table. So at this point, Sturgill loses even more sanity, and at this point, the Pinkerton arrives, and they start to investigate. And now Sturgill, after losing that sanity and seeing the scene, can decipher a little bit more of the book, decipher a little bit more of Cult of Ghouls, which isn't necessarily what he wanted, but he can at least use it for information now. And he finds that this was some sort of ritual that, as far as he could tell, used a dead corpse, or used a corpse, not dead corpse, dead corpse, yeah, used a corpse versus the undead corpse, turned a dead corpse into an undead corpse, but imbued it with some other intelligence. So it's kind of like the Herbert West thing that he transposed his mentality into a dead relative. This is a similar ritual, except the side effect of this ritual is that the face seems to be magically ripped off one and grafted onto the other corpse. So this is not something that is used lightly, and they don't know enough. I don't want to talk too much about it yet because they might investigate the actual ritual and a little bit more, because it doesn't necessarily tie largely into the rest of the scenario, but it does tie into the mythology of what's going on here, because they also ran into the undead coyotes out on the fire hill, out on the mound. So there's something going on. This being this the walking dude, as he is called. Hey, Mel. So the walking dude, as he is called, or Bartholomew Lonesome, or the Skinwalker, is obviously adept at not only shifting his own shape, but somehow dealing with the dead. PJ or other mythos fluent people might have an idea of who or what it is, but you know, it's I left it very broad. I gave it this kind of Randall Flagg type identity, but it is a mythos, and it is an expression of the mythos. So, it is. So yeah, he finds this ritual, and at this point, Maggie Mel, who just popped on, is there as her Pinkerton. She starts investigating. So, of course, they find the ritual evidence. You know, they're starting to try to figure out how exactly this ritual functions. And it was an interesting scenario. So it concludes. So Bertie remains on the porch, drunk, passed out. Let me conclude this kind of how this wrapped up. This was actually very short. We played for about 2.5 hours. We generally played 3 to 3.5. This was 2.5 because we had one of Mel's birthday celebrations before the game with some dinner and goodies and drink, and then we sat down to play. So it was a little shorter session, which was fine because the main point of this session was to wrap up that encounter with Benny, or the undead Benny, and reveal what was going on. So it was absolutely great that it was actually really compact. So it ends up that, you know, Atticus is out wandering around the town, still somewhat intoxicated, but also now temporarily insane and touched with this supernatural clarity. At a 1 percentage. I mean, there's actually some other stuff I'm gonna send you, Andy, that I'm gonna let you piece together from the. Oh, so but before I could investigate, Maggie had first dibs. Oh so that was actually pretty important. Yeah, no, one of the deputies came because he heard gunshots, and that was right. That was a great interaction because Sturgill comes out and he's going, "Oh no, you know, sometimes animals get into places. Well, I had an animal. He somehow got into the mortuary, and I got scared and I shot a gun, and he rolled really good, even though he's like completely like fried. His eyes are glazed and he's shaking, because he's lost sanity. He ends up convincing the deputy. And by the way, the deputies are not the brightest bulbs in town. There's a reason why they're deputies and not, other law deputized civilians, and not necessarily a sheriff or a marshal. So, that convinces him, it's just, something went wrong. And then he sees Bertie there who's like stinking drunk, so he's assuming something just got out of hand. And Sturgill's a really respected person in town. So the deputy just dropped it. He was like, all right, body chute left. Yeah. So he said the body chute, we said the body chute to drop the bodies down into the morgue area had been left open and a raccoon got down. That's what was causing a ruckus down there. So yeah, of course the deputy's like, and at that point he just realizes something got out of hand and nobody that he knows was hurt or that was important was hurt, so he just leaves. So they conned the deputy into leaving, which was good. And then so then Maggie went right downstairs and started investigating. And she did find some interesting notes. The biggest thing that she found is that there were no noticeable tracks besides Benny and then probably the walking corpse that got up and started walking around after the ritual. So whoever or whatever did this can dematerialize or can move through walls, or it can become a spirit or whatever. So again, they're becoming aware, and as players, they kind of already figured out that this Bartholomew Lonesome was not a real person, is an entity of some sort. So they have, this confirms what they had thought. And this is also reminiscent to when they found a cattle mutilation. Whole 9 yards, very X-Files, saw the light, saw this strange being in the light. Cattle all disappear, and they come back the next day or 2 days later or something, fused in bizarre fashions, right? So like the lead up of the campaign had that very kind of X-Files feel. There is a abducted school teacher, abducted in similar circumstances, who came back pregnant, who claims she literally could not physically have ever gotten pregnant. So there's the other things going around that smack of that alien intelligence. And again, if you're a Delta Green fan, you've already pieced all the pieces together or have an idea of what's going on. And so do the players. Again, it's really great because this group of players has really been able to separate what they think is players versus the role playing of their characters. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, but so they end up fortunately getting rid of the marshal, the deputy. The marshal, by the way, loses. So Fran's character, Fran was not there. He loses 4 sanity, and he just he's out. He leaves. He's shaken. He leaves. Also, because the player wasn't there. I mean, he knew that he was in that situation. Like he left the last game in that situation, so he knew he was going to be confronting something supernatural, possibly sanity inducing or insanity inducing. So he was fine losing the force sanity. I talked to him before the game. I said, "Do you mind if I keep the marshal there?" Because it could be a dangerous situation. He said, "Absolutely." He said, "He's there, so go ahead and use him." But then I just had him leave. I was like, he's done. He's done for the game. He's out. So when Fran comes back, he can jump back in. But he lost his sanity. So everybody's losing sanity again, except for Birdie, who's sitting on the porch drunk, which was really hilarious. And the role playing there was also really hilarious, especially because she was mad because she is an African American. She was being told to stay outside. So being a former slave and now being a shotgun rider, she got really mad when the characters were telling her, "Oh no, you got to wait outside." It was like this. She had this PTSD flashback, and it was really good role playing. That this character was really pissed off at being made to do this, but then they were like, "No, you're drunk and you have a shotgun." And she's like, "Oh yeah, okay, you're right." So then she goes and she passes out someplace, falls asleep in like the front stoop of the cobbler's house, I think I said. I just kind of randomly said like where she stumbled off to and passed out. And the cobbler finds her the next morning. Atticus goes and he falls asleep on the church door. And the next morning, well, that night they wrap up. They stow the bodies. And I don't remember at what point you said you were going to go bury them or get rid of them, but I know we agreed that you were going to. I don't know if you did it that night or you were doing it the next morning. But I don't think you were keeping it around. You can correct me for the next game if I've mistaken the order of operations. But I'm pretty sure you said you were at least the body that was reanimated, the one that was in the middle of being worked on, you were going to get rid of. And of course, he, as far as I know, he took the book and he stowed that away again. And they will probably be starting there next time. But in the meantime, so Atticus goes and he falls asleep passes out, passes out, and on the church stairs. So I kind of did a little bit of finagling, a little bit of rolling, and I decided it was the young deacon that finds him the next morning. And so he starts in this kind of remnant lucidity from the insanity the night before, starts playing up this experience of seeing the cosmos with the deacon. And so the deacon now tells him that there are a few people in town who know the truth and they want to have a meeting. So that's one of the areas that we left off. So of course the joke is that every game he's in, Andy joins a cult. Apparently even in Elden Ring he did it. So every game he's in, he ends up joining a cult. So of course this one has no different. Now in this one, however, he's decided that he's going to be more prepared. And he has started getting things like nails, a glass jar, and blasting powder. So this is his new clarity. He has realized there is something greater going on here, something greater and supernatural going on there, and Atticus has decided that he's going to resolve it, at least this aspect of it. Which we all know that every Call of Cthulhu game ends up with the players doing something highly criminal, like burning half a town down. Because no reasonable person's going to listen to stories of monsters and alien gods and all these other things. So the only recourse the players have left is to end up destroying half the town. So we're slowly seeing this. It took a little longer than I thought, but we're slowly seeing this move to that level. So that's kind of where we left it. So we left it. We're not going to be playing this week, but we'll be playing in 2 weeks, and we'll hopefully, I think so. It's not considered an IED if it's barely improvised. Yeah, basically. Yeah. Talk to some of my vet friends about that, and about like improvised explosives, and what happens with improvised explosives if people don't. We're gonna have some interesting rolling going on. I think, as you know, I'm not totally roll heavy unless it's a case of life, death, or possible dismemberment, and I think playing with an improvised IED in an Old West setting definitely counts. So in the meantime, Maggie, the next day, we did play a little bit into the next day. So Birdie ended up doing something. I think she just started looking around town and making sure there's nothing she had to do as like a shotgun rider and get some things together around town. Atticus is kind of prepping. The marshal's out. Sturgill, I think, was taking care of the situation. Yeah, he went to the Buckhorn for another drink. Sturgill, I believe, was taking care of the situation um, in terms of Benny and Benny's corpse and what he was going to do and how he's going to next plan. But Maggie decides she's going to go and she's going to investigate the explosion at the stamp mill, which is the whole reason why her character came to town. Now, of course, this is instrumental in the plot, and this is where the the heroes tracked the remainder of the outlaw slash cultist gang when they turned this strange mineral they had found over to the being, the Migo, which they now know as a Migo. Well, the players don't know it's a Migo. The characters know it's a Migo. The players know it's a Migo. And it vanished. But before it vanished, it did something to the mechanics in the plant, and the place just blew. And they got out. They got out fine. I had them make the roll to escape before the full explosion settled in, and they escaped. But she's there investigating the plant. So as she's investigating the plant, she overhears. She's in the Forthright Mining Company executive offices, kind of interrogating, one of the officers who, or foreman, is supposed to be in charge of all this. And there's a commotion going on with several of the other foremen and workers. And she finds out that almost the entirety of Chinatown, the camp that's just outside of town, has vanished. And the connection there is that the Chinese were the first to find some strange things in the mines. They first found a set of dinosaur bones that they called the unlung dragon bones. And then they found the mummies of these large serpentine like humans, which, again, if you know the lore, these serpent like beings that were wrapped up in this area of, when they broke through one of the walls in the mine, they cracked through an area of the mine, they found this cave behind it. And this cave, the ceiling and the walls of the cave had all these designs on them, these kind of primitive markings that would seem to move, that would seem to shift and cause this distortion. And the Chinese had stopped working in the mine. They decided to blow that chamber up and attempt to cave it back in. And they threw a stick of dynamite in. Well, actually, the marshal did, Fran did, and they left. So they don't really know what happened after that. But in between, the Chinese found something. The Chinese workers found something that they took to the Buddhist temple, and they've been worshiping it for a while. Their behavior started changing. They started milling around it, meditating on it, and they won't let anyone in to see exactly. Well, they didn't not let anyone in. No one actually tried to get into the temple to see what it was. They were massed around the temple the last time anybody was in Chinatown several days earlier, and now it seems that all of from what they heard, they haven't been up there yet. All of the population of Chinatown has vanished except for some old monks in the temple, or an old monk in the temple. They tried to convince Ipsang, the launderer, who's the one Chinese who lives in town, lives in Pinos Altos, not Chinatown, and he refused to go. And he right now is the only translator they have. There is another one as a player character who wasn't able to be there, and depending on what happens, if that player's there, then she could go and talk to whoever's left in Chinatown, or I might say that they could just take her as a character. I prefer not to play someone's character for possibly that instrumental of a interaction, but if she can't make it, then we might have to do it. So that's where it was left off, and that's the story. That's the wrap up. And it was great role playing on everybody's part. And what really impressed me the most was I didn't have to coach. I posted this on one of the Cthulhu forums on Facebook. I didn't even have to coach any of the sanity laws for Insanity. The players are all very reactive to it, and they respond in character really, really well. And it's really great to see players who are willing to bounce off of it and embrace that aspect of it. embrace this idea that, they're dealing with this situation that is deteriorating, the reality deteriorating. And it's going to be really interesting. Really interesting to see what happens in the next game session. Because we're getting to a point now that things are culminating around town and getting. Embrace the cosmos. Yes, we'll see what happens when you embrace the cosmos. We'll see how that plays out. Um, I I'm interested in seeing how the rest of the situation is handled because we're also at an acceleration point. And I think the players sense that. The players sense that now things are are ramped up and that things have been put into motion on a larger scale. And as we said, the original 3 or 4 weeks of it were actually the prelude to the scenario. There was a lot of build up, and they were playing through the prelude, and they didn't exactly realize they were playing through the prelude. They started off with the introduction of the stamp mill blowing up, and I just said 3 days earlier, and had everybody going about their business, what they were doing in town. So it was kind of an interesting setup. And now, yeah, I mean, I've got definite finite points, got definite endpoints, but I don't necessarily want to dictate what's going to happen. A lot of it's going to be based on the player choices, as tends to happen in this kind of scenario, in this type of game. So that's where we're at. Any thoughts from any of the players who were involved? Andy, we'll put it up here. So freaking excited to play again. I'm excited for it to play. I'm excited to play again too. Like I said, I'm thinking next week's gonna be it. Hopefully, not the end of the game, but I think we'll get to play again next week. And maybe I'll shoot for trying to do a longer focused session. I think that's gonna be fun. So that's where we're at. Anyone else have anything to share? Peach, got anything going on? Gaming world, other world, except for the concerts we were talking about. That sadly we won't get to meet up at. Once summer hits, though, especially once I'm done with the semester, we'll definitely do a get together. Either I can come up your way, or we could meet, or we could do that gaming weekend we've talked about for like 2 years, 3 years before COVID. So I hope everything is going well and sane over at the Bird House, not the Bird and Non House, with the Munchkins, with the crazy children. Justin's running a kids game for a group of 6 or so year olds. I respect him immensely for having the mental fortitude to do that, the parenting instinct to do that. Um. So yeah. So PJ, yeah, definitely. So yeah. So once if Bigelow has that, assuming I get an invite, I would definitely head up there. Like I said, they're not that far from me at this point. In fact, I said recently to Carrie, because I asked Carrie to go to that Judas Priest show with me because Queensryche was opening. She's a huge Queensryche fan, and as if you saw my post, you saw I've never been a Queensryche fan. I just one of those bands. I know they're great. I know they're talented. I never got into them at all. Like I just couldn't. So, but she couldn't do it because it was a school night, and I got that, but and I had an extra ticket, and I asked her to go, and but we said like, all right, we gotta have a get together soon because we're not that far. Like at this point, we're only like 40 minutes, 45 minutes from each other, so it's definitely worth it. And yeah, so Sturgill says, yeah, Sturgill did what Lonesome wanted, but not in the way he wanted done. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's yeah, in a roundabout way. So you said something really interesting. You said that because everybody was kind of speculating why. Oh yeah, okay, all right, yeah. I'll talk about that in a minute, PJ. Yeah, I know. Well, Tate wasn't with Queensryche this time, but aside from that, I think it was. I mean, they put on a good show. Again, I'm talking to them, but anyway, yeah. So Sturgill Justin was speculating, like the players were speculating as to what the motive was for this entity, for Bartholomew Lonesome to commit this ritual murder and kill Benny. And Sturgill said, I failed the test. Like, that was my punishment. Like, my goal was to take on his power or become part of his coven. And the test was to see if I would kill my friend and worker. Um and to gain the power and to really fully understand the Forbidden Book and all that. And that was the line Sturgill wasn't willing to cross. And you did nail it. That was the whole thing. And he wanted to show you that this is the power that he has and that you could have had and that you could have in if you had followed, if you had played his game, if you had played his sinister game. But that's the point that the player has to decide, is my character going to remain a hero and an investigator, even a flawed one, or are you going to become a cultist, right? And in some games, the players opt to become the cultist. It happens, you know. It's not a thing that I even was like, don't do it. I left it open. That's why I gave that option, that if you wanted to embrace the mythos and, you know, start really studying the book and get these lessons. And so this goes back to what I said in the first horror video, that horror games, part of what makes them that is that they're not fair. You know, I gave you this book, and as a player, you at first you were like, oh, maybe it's a resource. It's keys to the mystery. But it was a trap. Literally, I handed you a trap right off the bat that the more you kept reading it, the more dangerous everything got. And the more dangerous your interactions with this being would become. So that was part of what I said. Okay, those familiar with Mr. King's writings also know that Randall Flagg, the walking dude, is a mask of Nigral-Hotep. I don't know. Maybe he is. So that's an interesting point. And if you know a little bit of the background of the Migo, it could all start to make sense. So I'm going to put that right up in chat. Yeah, I have always interpreted Randall Flagg as the Crawling Chaos. That's absolutely how I've always interpreted him. I never, you know, thought it wasn't. And I don't know if King ever, because, you know, in The Stand they frame it as religious because it's the modern context and he is the devil, right? He's Satan. But I've always interpreted it, and then when he appears in the other stories with different masks on, essentially, I've always interpreted it as an expression of Nigral-Hotep or the Crawling Chaos. The Crawling Chaos is. There's speculation that maybe they were originally two separate things, but by I think all standards now are that the Crawling Chaos was about him. So it's about it, because it's not an entity. It takes on forms. So we shall see. So, and there's still Fire Hill. And they're like starting to figure out that whatever's in Fire Hill is still different than what's here. And there was some relationship between the description of one of the events at Fire Hill and the ritual involving Benny. So they're starting to piece together these little bits, and I think that's why it's a little bit more of a slow burn. I may have overextended myself as a game master because I have like three or four different kind of like threads going on that are related, but I think it's satisfying. I think people are enjoying it. So yeah, that's where we're at. As far as the evoking horror element, let's see. I mean, I've cross-pollinated and relative to Crawling Chaos with the Living Darkness, the Legend of the Five Rings. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean that. So that's the interesting thing about that figure in particular, that outer god in particular, is that um, it's so mutable into any of these archetypes, any of these demonic archetypes. And so Andy says, "Yeah, heck, we are. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next game too." So Manitou in Deadlands, he has very a lot of the imagery for this game I actually borrowed from the Manitou in Deadlands. So again, yes, there's that whole relationship between these various games. And there was a lot in Deadlands, there was a lot of, let's see. There was a lot of interaction and relationship between in my opinion, Deadlands and what we saw in terms of Cthulhu influence and Lovecraftian influence. Chat pause. Why is chat paused? Unpause that chat. Now my chat app I think stopped working again. Maybe it's the crawling chaos. Maybe he has come to wreak havoc. Let me refresh this. Yeah, so we shall see. And again, there is a thread between all of these kind of, well, looks like the site's down, the chat site's down. Okay. Well, that's one of the flaws of doing it that way. That's one of the threads in all of these sorts of mythologies is that you have this nomadic, for lack of a better word, nomadic entity that is an agent of something that is beyond our recognition, and this is the way that it interacts with the world. And that's kind of how I've built up Bartholomew Lonesome as well. Because it started out maybe he was a skinwalker in the traditional sense, like a Native American shapeshifter, but that's what they heard from the Native Americans. They were calling him a skinwalker. So again, they were seeing it through their lens as well. Yeah, glad you guys are all enjoying it. Glad you're all enjoying it. All right, and I think the sign from the outer gods of my well groomed and now manicured chat interface crashing is I think I'll leave it there for tonight, and we'll pick up probably next week with another chat. I'll come up with a topic, and then we will hopefully have some more about this game from the Down Darker Trails Call of Cthulhu scenario in the next few weeks. So, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for playing. Most of all, thanks for hanging out and chatting. It's good to catch up with people here, especially a few people here. I think the only person who's on tonight who I don't talk to regularly is PJ, I talk to him online, but see in person. So I think, let's see. Oh, there we go. It's working again. All right. Yeah, so the Dread, I am playing this one. I'm doing. See you later, Justin. This one I am. Real disappointed Firehill doesn't have any fire. From Andy. Well, I don't know. I mean, you've gotten some hints as to why it would be. Well, you know what? Historically, it's called Firehill because that's where the Apache had their fire rituals at. But that now it's taken on this whole other more sinister meaning because there's this discussion of using black fire to summon something. So we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Yeah. So the Dread, the Dread in this game was a little different. It was more like the resolution, the popping of the Dread bubble, right? When they saw Benny, this thing that was Benny, and then they had to overcome it and defeat it. But the greater Dread now is that they're dealing with this obviously extremely powerful supernatural entity that's able to in essence kind of shift reality. He was able to get this book even though it was secured. He was able to get into the morgue and leave no trace and perform this horrible ritual. And you don't know. Did Benny participate in it willingly? Was he duped into that? Was he mind controlled? Did this creature just knock him out and use him? I mean, we don't know. We don't know. So that the Dread right now is more of a tangible threat Dread. Hopefully he will start to diffuse the situation with some ordnance. That's Andy's plan. As I said, every good Call of Cthulhu game ends up with the players burning, like half the town down or something. It's inevitable. So, all right, guys, thanks for the chat. I'm gonna run. We'll see you later, and I'll see some of you this weekend, and I'll talk.